part of our meeting will be the business portion, including the treasurer's report, clerk's report, and the president's report. Then an open discussion with questions, suggestions. We'll have a break for refreshments, and then our guest speaker is Laurie Sanders. She's a naturalist and co-director of Historic Northampton, who will provide an overview of the Manhan River. And I believe she has a surprise from one of our properties. So, I'd like to introduce the board members. I'm Diane McLean, the president.
John Bader, vice president, which is easier than being president.
It sure is. I'd like to switch back. And then Rachel.
Is this working?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Rachel, Sledgeman, treasurer.
Eric Rose, new guy.
Mark Klein, old guy. Michael Carrone.
I'm Tom Lotzmeiser, director.
Mary Lou Dodge, board clerk. Katie Carroll, board member.
The first order of business is to re-elect there's a re-election every three to 7 years. As long as they wish to remain on the board, I'll give them an out. John Bader is up for re-election this year. Molly Goodwin, who's on vacation, is up for re-election. Scott Tunderman and Sue Waltz. So I'd like to ask the floor if they would like to make a motion to re-elect these members.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have a new clerk, Mary Lou Dodge, who we would like to formally nominate her for this position. She's been working as our note taker, clerk, and organizer for quite some time. Well, for at least a year. We really appreciate it. Can I have a motion from the floor to nominate Mary Lou for the position of clerk? And a second? All in favor? We'd also like to again thank Don Ackley, who has held this position for many years. Her dedication and commitment was very appreciated. And we're delighted to have Mary Lou take on this role, really. It's great. This is exciting. We have 2 new board members who would like to formally vote on the board. One is Alan Clark, who couldn't make it tonight, and Eric Rose, who is the new guy. I'd like to ask the floor for a motion to vote Alan Clark to the board of the PCT.
So moved.
Okay, a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Same for Eric. Would somebody from the floor like to make a motion?
I so move.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're really pleased to welcome these 2 board members. They come with a suitcase full of values. Yeah. And money. They bought their way on the board. I'd like to ask anyone on the floor if they have anyone they'd like to nominate for the board. Okay, that's fine. If you think of anyone who would like to be on the board of the Great Pascommuck Conservation Trust, just let us know. First up is the treasurer's report.
Okay. Let's see if I can get through this. It's very short. I'm very nervous. All right. Hi, folks. Thank you all, by the way, just for being members. Like, I'm the treasurer, so I see your checks, and I'm like very heartened by every single one we get, and I really appreciate it. It's really wonderful. Okay, here's the balance sheet report for this year. We have, I'm just going to read a bunch of numbers. Feel free to, interrupt me. We have 198,963 in current assets, which includes cash and, can everybody hear me? Should I take this off?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
cash and investment accounts, this is up from 178,818 from last year, 3,124. The difference is primarily reflected in our modest investment accounts value rising and a $5,000 donation from the contamination of Manhan River, unfortunately, from G&G Construction, and the very successful estate sale we had at Bill Burford. So thank you, Bill. Is it okay? My technical assistant here. Thank you, Benna. We have no liabilities. This comes from being an all-volunteer board. So our bottom line is, as of March 1st, 2025, 409,623, including our properties. So you add what I just said with our properties. And last year it was 389,478. Sorry. In December, the board authorized the opening of a high-yield money market. So we moved 120,000 from our checking account to establish it, and that's been doing really well. And that's it. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions or anything you want to know? That's fine. Great.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Rachel. And now the clerk's report.
All right, I'll make this quick. The Pascommuck Conservation Trust annual meeting was held at the Blue Room at City Hall in Easthampton at 7 p.m. Tuesday, Feb. 27, 2024. Attending were 11 board members and approximately 40 members of the public. Our trust president, Diane McLean, opened the meeting, welcoming members of the public and introducing members of the board. Both treasurer's report for 23-24 year and the clerk's report of the minutes of the last annual meeting were read and approved by all present. Then Diane listed our projects and activities for this past year, or the past year, including, number one, the acquisition of a 10-acre parcel on the Manhan River in Easthampton. That was a gift of a trust member, and it increases our ability to protect the river and its banks, a precious wildlife corridor and greenway that winds through our city. This new parcel is now going to connect to one of our oldest properties, the old Pascommuck section. Secondly, our maintenance committee, assisted by the ever able Kevin Mulligan, has worked to repair heavy storm damage and other wear and tear on trails and properties, keeping them walkable, enjoyable for the public. And fundraising from 2 seasonal plant sales, as well as the sale of several memorial benches on our properties, and sale of our calendars and a pop-up shop, new this year, selling our t-shirts and hats, has created a good amount of income for the trust. All right, and this was last year, and still going on, the trust closely monitoring the Tasty Top proposed development on Route 10. We continue to be active in speaking to the town and residents about its possible threats to the natural landscape and wildlife in the area. To be continued. The trust continues to offer its annual scholarship to a local high school senior interested in environmental issues. And we continue to set up our information tables at community events, our Sunday farmers markets and cultural chaos, etc. And from those tables, we get a lot of new residents informed that we do have a lot of trails in town. And we hand out maps and let them see where they are. We are collaborating environmental protection efforts with the Easthampton Land Protection Collaborative and the Upper Manhan River Watershed Committee. And during, let's see, the next event, which was our open discussion last year, board member Tom Lautzenheiser asked the audience for input on our proposed banning of dogs from our properties. A good discussion with mixed reactions followed, with a general sense of agreement that our mission is that of a protector of the creatures and the health of the properties we overlook, and our current knowledge, and this is what science knows now, is that dogs' presence is harmful and destructive to wildlife on any trail. Finally, Diane expressed to all the members and volunteers that we have had show up this year, we're grateful for financial support and a lot of help with property maintenance. So then there was a refreshment break last year, and our speaker was introduced. That was Marty Klein, longtime board member, noted mycologist and photographer, who gave an illuminating and beautiful presentation slideshow on mushrooms in our area throughout the seasons. And adjournment of the meeting was motion for at 9:10 with all in favor. And that was that.
I move we accept the minutes.
Second.
All in favor? And we'll go back to move to accept the treasurer's report. But I have it written down here too. Could I,
So moved.
yeah, so move to second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, so on to the president's report. The gifts and acquisitions, we have had the great privilege of acquiring a gift of land. It's almost like a ditto. It's about 10 acres, a 10-acre parcel on the Manhan that will now be conserved and cherished by mostly birds, mammals, flora, and fauna. This parcel will remain open space since it has no access. An Easthampton homeowner has acted to protect these 10 acres of state significant habitat. It is set aside as an undisturbed natural area. The parcel is a complex of floodplain, forest, and wetlands extending along nearly half a mile of riverfront. And it was very exciting. It's like a piece of wild land that we're able to protect and let all the animals be undisturbed. This is in addition to last year's about 10 acres, as Mary Lou mentioned. As you can see, one of our major focus areas is the protection of the Manhan. And it'll be, Laurie will have a better viewpoint of that. We were very happy to be a partner with Kestrel Land Trust and DCR to protect a farm off of East Street. As you know, there are a few farms on East Street and they may become vulnerable at some point. The PCT is here to protect farms, open space, and forest. So once this project is complete and public, we will let everyone know where we stand with that. But it's really exciting to have a hand in that. Another incredibly exciting project, which we plan to start in the spring, is to eradicate invasives, starting with 2 properties. We received funding to cover 3 years of invasive work at Brickyard Brook and Edward Dwyer. We're hoping to include 2 more properties next year. This is a project that's been on our list for some time, and it's really hard to get everything together and everything aligned. So as we move forward and get rid of the invasives, we plan to plant native plants in these areas, attracting pollinators. Next, we're currently working on funding to replace a bridge near the East Street entrance at Mutterfield. If you can remember back to last spring, we had a huge amount of rain which changed many of our river and brook banks. The paths of the river and brooks changed with a strong flow, and it has degraded part of that. So we are redoing a bridge and hopefully upgrading part of Mutterfield. Last year, about this time, we hosted a guided walk of Old Pascommuck, as well as the Mountain North Trailhead. This guided walk was part of the Mass Land Trust Coalition's annual meeting, and it was an honor to showcase our properties to individuals in the wider Massachusetts conservation community. People came from all parts of Massachusetts, and we're happy to see that we were able to protect as much land as we can. So it's a thank you to everyone here in this room. I'd like to take a minute to thank our property specialist, Kevin Mulligan, for all the work he has done with the PCT. He's done great work. Fundraising, as you know, our major fundraising events were plant sales, which we all loved, but the onset of jumping worms made us pivot. So we're moving our fundraising efforts to tag sales. Our initial sale was at an estate sale at PCT's founding member's home. It was a lot of work, but boosted the balance sheet for our all-volunteer trust. We want to thank Bill for his generosity. And hopefully we're planning to have another tag sale at John Bader Park in May. The Memorial Bench fundraiser, bunch of benches. We have spots open, so if you'd like, please, let Garrett or someone on the board know. This year, the benches were added to Old Trolley Line, 2 at Edward Dwyer Conservation Area, and 2 at Pomeroy Meadow. The open bench spots are located in strategic areas to truly enjoy Easthampton's great attributes. And next for fundraising, again, Sue Waltz's famous Nashawanic Pond calendar. The sales have been generously donated to the PCT. Sue has taken on this project for many, many years, and she's now passing the calendar baton on to Marty. So Marty's taking over. Public relations and outreach. We arranged with Kestrel Land Trust to stage a joint field trip for the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition. We continue to spend a lot of time in the monitoring, as we did last year, of the proposed Sierra Vista Commons, known as Tasty Tap. We've submitted numerous letters, maps to the city, and will continue our quest. Members of the PCT are involved in the Easthampton Land Protection Collaborative, which was mentioned as well. This group meets quarterly, and it's a union from those of Fish and Wildlife, the city, Kestrel Land Trust, Mass Audubon, and us. So we're able to get together and talk about the properties in Easthampton and the surrounding areas. It's been very helpful. We always offer a scholarship to support high school grads interested in the environment. And as Mary Lou said, we are involved in the community events, the cultural chaos. Our thank you to members, Ice Cream Social, and hosted many tables at the farmers market and other venues in Easthampton. Going on to property maintenance, one of our big maintenance projects last year was to retrail the old Pascommuck Conservation Area. It was a true challenge, which was done in the spring, which I mean mud. Changing the direction and doing restorative work on the trails will also minimize future maintenance, which everybody's happy about. We've had multiple erosion issues due to the heavy rainfall last year. In some areas, the river swept through the forest at Dwyer Conservation Area for 100 feet or more, requiring rerouting of trails and moving benches to go beyond the bank's structure. And always the infrastructure repairs, broad bridges, sets of stairs, there's always maintenance. I'm going to ask for your help later. For this year coming up, we will continue to monitor the Sierra Vista Commons, continue to be involved in the Easthampton Land Protection Collaborative. Land protection is always our top priority. We're proactive in the conservation and protection of sites in and around Easthampton. And we'll complete a scholarship as well. Our tag sale's in May, so you'll be getting our notice and newsletters. So I worked through it quickly so we could listen to Laurie's presentation. But this is the time for open discussion, so if anybody has any comments, questions, suggestions, we're always looking for people to help us out with maintenance, property maintenance, trails, cutting things. We do things from breaking to major work, but it's always fun. It's good. Does anyone have a question? So that's a good one. So I move to adjourn the business meeting. And can I have a motion to adjourn the business meeting?
Make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
A second?
Second.
Do we have to accept your report?
Oh, that's true. Thank you, Marty. I don't want acceptance. Can I have a motion to accept the president's report? Thank you. A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Now we can go on to the adjournment.
I would just like to throw a little request out to the audience. If there's anybody out there who likes to do public relations, like publicizing events and that kind of thing, we could really use somebody that's dedicated to doing that. Right? Yeah. I mean, we kind of do, one does a little and another, but it would be great to have a dedicated person. So if anybody is interested in doing that as a volunteer, let us know.
And we'd be happy to have you. Okay. So, anything else from the board? Our board is growing a little bit by little bit, and with very educated in the environmental areas. So we're really pleased. I neglected to introduce Alan Clark, who is online, and Sue Waltz also. They're both board members. With that, I can adjourn the business meeting officially. And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So we'll break for refreshments, and then Laurie Sanders, our guest speaker, will go ahead with her presentation.
Well, thanks so much for not only coming, but for staying. And when I spoke to Marty a couple months ago about the possibility of being here tonight, he said, well, we're really interested in the Manhan River. And my husband and I live in Westhampton, and the Manhan, as you're going to learn a little bit more, is part of our town too. So I feel like it was just a very nice combination. So I think for most of us, for so many people, the way they know about the Manhan River today is because they drive over it and they see that they're crossing a bridge. But historically, the Manhan River has had a profound effect if we look just locally at Easthampton in terms of the history of Easthampton. And so in the old days, when you would go across the bridges of the Manhan, you had a little bit longer time to admire the Manhan and look over. And the crossing of the Manhan River happens in many locations in Easthampton, and it was celebrated in many, many postcards. So these are two bridges that some of you may remember. I was just talking with John Brader. He said, oh, remember that one bridge? And I said, you're going to see a postcard in just a few minutes. These are two bridges that were very close to where the Manhan meets the confluence of the Oxbow. But the most celebrated, I would say, is the one that we cross now along Route 10. The upper image is when there was a covered bridge in that section from 1838 to 1897, and then that bridge comes down and you get a view, this other view in the lower corner of the newer, more modern bridge of the time. Now, many of you know Easthampton well, so that you know if you're just not too far away is this feature, which is a large exposure of what we often call a red rock. It's a 200 million year old sandstone. And this is where the first dam was constructed, and this site has had a profound impact on the history of Northampton and continues to. So here's this big exposure of sandstone. It is the location when, in 1675, that when three proprietors from Northampton, so Northampton by that point had been settled for about 20 years. If you look at the historic maps, there's this big block of Northampton, and there's this like little tiny finger that comes over that includes this portion. So people knew for a long time that there was a rock exposure. And when you have a rock exposure, it's a great place to build a dam. And so in 1675, 3 proprietors are given permission to build a sawmill there. Not too much later, a fellow named Samuel Bartlett is given the authority to put in a grist mill and corn mill. He is one of the handful of enslavers in Northampton at that point, and 2 of his enslaved people worked at that grist mill. And they would be grinding corn and wheat. That, as a grist mill, it's a meeting place, so it's right, you've got one on one side, you've got the sawmill on one side, the grist mill on the other, and lo and behold, no surprise, it's a great time while your wheat is being ground to go get a drink. And so there was a tavern that was established there in the early 1700s. So at that point, what we call Easthampton now is still part of Northampton. It was initially owned by, this is a 20th century rendition that's at historic Deerfield of what the tavern looked like, and it was eventually transferred from a Lyman to the Claps, and this signature of the lion was one of the features which you saw over and over again in taverns. So the tavern, this is the 1831 map, so by now Easthampton is its own entity, it becomes its own town in 1785. But if you look at the top, where the red circle is, you can see, I hope, on one side it says grist mill, on the other side it says sawmill. Right across the way is where the tavern is, and guess what? Just up the hill is where the meeting house was, because meeting houses were on hill, right? On hills, and so just up the slope, it's not in the same location, it's sort of in this area where we are today. By 1831, there's more, the first residents, full-time residents in Easthampton come around 1700. So by 1831, when this map is made, that you got plenty of generations. So if you look at, you can see these little squiggles, that's Broad Brook, and then the brook that fills what's called the Rubber Thread Pond, for those of you who are old enough. But there's a sawmill up above, more or less where the lower mill pond is on Broad Brook. And then another one down below at the bottom. The other really important tributary, the important tributary within Easthampton to the Manhan, and one that just dramatically changed the history of this town, is Broad Brook. And you can see in this early postcard, one other just side note is that all these postcards were, my mother-in-law grew up here in Easthampton, and these are all her postcards, which I have never had the opportunity to. My husband grew up here in Easthampton, so this is part of another reason that I just wanted to say yes to Marty. So for many years, Broad Brook, you saw in 1831, was still a little brook, but by the 1840s, the first dam goes in, and that forms the upper mill pond, which we know today as Nashawanek Pond. So here's an early image of it. For a long time, it was just called the Upper Mill Pond, and there was a little, like, I would call it marketing improvement. It's called Nashawanek Pond. But Nashawanek Pond, that water power fuels the button mill, which is really the first major industry here in Easthampton. And from Williston's first button shop, more factories grow. That has a lot of head, and not only is there more development with more factories, it's right in the time of, within American history, lots of industrial development happening in nearby Northampton. And this dramatically changes not only the economics of the town as more mills come in, but it also changes the demographics of the town, right? This is the heyday of immigration in America. The Irish are coming. The Irish famine coincides more or less with the establishment of that first dam on Broad Brook. And with these people, of course, the downtown changes. For what, the first 150 years, it's, you know, you're a Congregationalist and that's what you are, right? But then really after the Civil War, as the proliferation of people who are coming here, French Canadian, Irish, Polish, there's a proliferation of religions and churches and architecture. So just the damming of that tributary to the Manhan just radically changes this town. And then the pond itself becomes this environmental influencer, it's aesthetic, and it's a recreational resource. And it's a recreational resource for a long time, including this summer. But we've just been looking right at this little part of Easthampton. But one of the things that was talked about, I think, in the President's report and the previous, is all these kind of collaborations and thinking more broadly. And so if you look at the watershed of the Manhan, it's very impressive. It's 55,000 acres. And so, more or less, okay, this is my crude, quick, and dirty. So if you look at this, you see the outline of Easthampton. Essentially, all of Easthampton drains into the Manhan watershed. Almost all of Southampton drains into most of Westhampton, where I live. Northampton, about a third of Northampton, and then as you look around, portions of Holyoke, Westfield, Montgomery, Huntington, and even a little tiny bit of Chesterfield. It's a watershed, even though it's small and we go sailing across it, it really reaches so many communities. So one of the things, because I think many of us, we don't have a lot of opportunities to ramble along that river. So here you see the lower portion in blue with the word Manhan. I hope you can see that. So here's the north branch, which I'm going to just go back so you can see it pop up. So this is the north branch. So one of the headwaters of the north branch of the Manhan, which is mostly draining Westhampton, is Pine Island Lake, which some of you have been to or will know. That's one portion. The south branch also begins up in Westhampton principally and goes a long way south, all the way into Westfield, and then turns and goes north. Now there's some other big tributaries that we mentioned. There's Broad Brook, which you see on here, and then there's also a brook that has so many different place names over time. Sometimes it's called Clam Brook, it's called Sawmill Brook, it's called Parsons Brook, and down in this section it's called Bassett Brook, named after Joel Bassett, who lived not far from there. And here is Easthampton, just because this is the audience, and so you have a sense of like, what's your piece? Within that 55,000 acre watershed, there's lots of different habitat types. And for the Native Americans who were here for about 400 generations, where we are, these lower areas, for the last 1,000 or so years, or for many more years than that, they were managing a lot of this landscape using fire as a tool. So down here in this lower portion of Easthampton, during the last 1,000 years, the agriculture was an important area. There was agriculture here in the area. Up on these, I would say, sort of the highlands where we are now, on these old sandy plateaus, that's probably where many more people were living. They were using fire as a tool, as I mentioned, and partly to have open areas to make it easier for them to walk. And it changed in this area because of the sandy soils. There was a lot of open plains. If you look at the historic maps, you'll see Fort Plain. Well, for the English, the word plain had a very distinctive meaning. A plain meant an open landscape that was in the uplands, whereas a meadow on those older English maps would mean an open area along a river. And the only way you get open areas, right, is through burning. And so what I like is that you can think, we actually know sort of the stewardship plan of Native people before us by just looking at those place names on those historic maps. In this area where we are, right here in the downtown of Easthampton, I'm sure there were big pitch pine areas in this section. There was also a lot of white pine. For Native Americans, they were fishing, they were trapping, they were hunting, they were foraging, not only in this lower area, but also in all the uplands of that other parts of the watershed. By the time the first English, they've been down in the Springfield area for about 20 years, and they work with the Nonotuck and the General Court, and there's an acquisition of about 63,000 acres. So you can see the outline of Northampton here, but then that also includes Easthampton, Southampton, Westhampton, and portions of Montgomery that subsequently are set aside. So this is probably for when Samuel Bartlett and those first 3 proprietors came up. This is probably what the downtown area of Easthampton looked like, and certainly that whole section out in the plains out near Broadbrook would have looked a little bit like this. For those early English settlers, they did not have enough livestock to slaughter and make tallow candles. So the pitch pine forests were exceedingly important, not only for timber, but they had these knots, which they would call candlewood. And so here's a quote from Trumbull's essay, Trumbull's History of Northampton, where people would almost as willingly commence the winter without hay as without a good supply of candlewood. So candle was this sappy, resinous stuff, probably smoked like crazy, but it was a way to light the inside of your house. For those first 150 years here in Easthampton, once people settled, farming was principally what happened here. But then, as I mentioned, really by the 1840s, just totally consistent with the industrialization, all widespread in America, there's lots of development. So where we're standing here is we're at Brookside. So think of being at the Brookside Cemetery. We're looking across Nashawanek Pond over toward Cottage Street, and maybe you can even recognize the rooftop of what's now the Guild Art Store. During that period, 1840s, and even before then, fire is a huge threat. And you see it over and over again, these reports of disastrous fires in major cities. If you saw those images, if you noticed in the postcards, almost all of those factories are built with brick. This is like where everyone wants to go because it's more fireproof. Because at this point, the only water supply here is principally, until the 1840s, just through old hollowed logs. And so fire suppression is this huge, huge issue. So by 1845, the railroad has arrived in Northampton. There's many more rails possible. Technology is such that they can make pipe that joins. And so there's this opportunity, and you see it in city after city after city, where they're suddenly thinking, we need fire suppression. And the issue for fire suppression is just so important because it's all about the economics. And drinking water, domestic use, is like way, way, way down the list. One of the things that distinguishes the Manhan River watershed is its significance to public drinking water supplies. Early on, it was fire suppression, but now very quickly we realize, and in fact, those early reports, fire suppression was number one, but afterward it would be irrigation, watering the roads to keep the dust down, and then, oh, by the way, domestic use. So by the time Easthampton is also really worried in the 1870s about where is its water supply going to come from, as the city is growing so much with all of this manufacturing development, everybody else is also looking. Northampton's looking, Holyoke's looking. And the Holyoke watershed land, which you see here, that's all protected watershed land in Westhampton for their large surface water reservoirs. And then the other pieces to focus on is the Barnes Aquifer, which is actually, you can see my cursor here, This is all, this high yield aquifer and barns are actually all connected, but there's a little kind of watershed divide here, that this water is draining south and the barns water is moving north underground. But look at, you can see I hope with the green, the medium yield aquifer. So much of this watershed is important to public drinking water supplies. Also makes it, as you all know, much more vulnerable to pollutants. So Easthampton thinks, oh, you know what? We need more water. Maybe we'll get our water from the north branch of the Manhan up in West Hampton. But that price tag is about $500,000. So they realized that down near Hendrick Street, where it's all a meadow, there's a place near Broadbrook where there are these springs, these sort of little artesian springs that come up. And it just so happens at that time that it's the Hendrick Farm, that's what Hendrick Stream is named after, and the fellow who's in charge of the water supply issue is also a relative who's named Hendrick. And he goes to this area, and when you can see a bridge, I think, in the background, that's going over Broadbrook, and they put a series of pipes down, and guess what? They get gushers. And that's where your drinking water comes from now. It's all, you're tapping into that Barnes aquifer. But you're probably, I hope, all thinking, but why is that water coming up like that? Oh, great. Glacial Lake Hitchcock. If any of you have been to my other talks, you know, like, you cannot get away without hearing about Glacial Lake Hitchcock. So the red star is where we are today. So we would be, if we could go back in time 13,000 years ago, we'd be under 100, 150 feet of water. We'd be cold. Here's another kind of a closer look at where we are. I tried to put the star exactly where we are tonight, sitting. So you can see the Glacial Lake Hitchcock. It's this long skinny lake that extends all the way up to White River Junction, and then south into Connecticut. There's a big debris dam of rocks and ice and other things that persists for a long, long time. The lake lasts about 3,000 years. And it's not always at like one single level. It bounces up and down, so it has different shorelines. But as the glacier is retreating, it's putting out tremendous amounts of meltwater and sand and gravel. And okay, it's Northampton and Amherst, right? But where are we? Oh, we're here, right? We all want to know where we are in the lake. So as those, we've all seen those National Geographic specials where you see that beautiful meltwater, that powder blue, where all that glacial flour is catching the light in a certain way. Well, here we have not only the Manhan River coming into the glacial Manhan River, but many of these other small tributaries are coming in, but they're nothing like we know today, right? They're charged with tremendous amounts of glacial meltwater during the warmer seasons. So they're creating vast outwash plains. There's big deltas that are forming. And if we look now, this is a very highly stylized block look at where we are. Here's, let's see if this cursor, okay, there's the cursor. Here we are in Easthampton. This is the Mount Tom Range, the Holyoke Range over here, the Oxbow. And so the question is why is there an aquifer called Barnes? Why is the water here in Easthampton pushing up like an artesian well? It gets back to a longer ago history, a couple 100 million years ago, when all the continents were together in this giant supercontinent of Pangaea. Those continental plates begin to break apart, but it's not like a clean break. It's happening over millions and millions of years, and there's all these points of weaknesses, these sort of long stretch marks and sutures that happen, and the Connecticut River Valley is one of those places. It's a rift valley, which you've heard of from Africa or from the Yellowstone area, and it's pulling apart, and so there's a fault that happens, and it slips down, and so these earlier rocks, these red beds, that the sandstones that have formed, here in this illustration that my husband made, they were laid down flat, right? But now there's a fault, and as there's an earthquake, and it slides. So that's why it's tipped. And so as the faulting is happening and there's tension, there's also volcanic activity that comes up and forms this basalt flat area, which you can see, I hope, dipping down. That's a much more erosion-resistant feature. And so that's why Mount Holyoke and Mount Tom and down to East Rock and West Rock in Connecticut, it's one of these north-south locations where the continents are pulling apart, some basalt comes up, and it's much more erosion-resistant than that sandstone below. So the sandstone everything here is a couple 100 million years old. More deposits happen on top, but you can see, so like the Portland, so on one side you have the Western Highlands, which some of us might call the Berkshires, right? The Eastern Highlands, that's the Pelham Hills. Those areas are all like 400 million years old. They formed when the continents were crushing together, when there were mountains here the size of Mount Everest in the Himalayas. Then you've got 200 million years of erosion. As that erosion is happening, it's deposited. The whole place we're close to the equator at that point, this part of the continent, the incipient North American continent. And so there's monsoon-like conditions, tremendous storm events. All this mud comes out, and these little tiny dinosaurs, early dinosaurs, are walking across some of that, right? What happens with Barnes Aquifer, you can see where the Manhan is, there's a little portion of that sandstone that doesn't erode. So when the glacier and all of these sediments are being deposited, and you've got Glacial Lake Hitchcock clays, fingering then with some sandy stuff or some gravel stuff, it's this fingering of clay and sand, but it happens to be in that nook, right, that's been created by this downfall. So it's a deeper section. So if we try to drill down in the Barnes Aquifer, it would be a much, much deeper over there if we drill down than right here. And it's all related to this very ancient geology. Fred's going to give next year's talk on geology. So here's a very stylized look. You've got all these sands that then, once the glacial lake disappears also, more sands are coming in from the Manhan and the Broad Brook and all these smaller tributaries. They're overtopping those glacial lake Hitchcock clays, which in this particular part of our area are interfingered with clays, sand. And as that water, because they're dipping a little bit, the water is moving underground through those sands. And it's as if the clay is like a cake. And so they're under pressure, so that when you punch a well pipe down there, there's pressure and it gushes. And there is the part of your drinking water supply where you're all drinking this ancient water, this 10,000-year-old water or more that was there since Glacial Lake Hitchcock time. So here again is the outline of Easthampton. The star is more or less where the Hendrick Street wells are. And so when the city put those wells in there, instead of $500,000, it was only like 30,000. Good deal. And now, there are many more wells, not only for Easthampton and that location, but Southampton has wells, Holyoke has wells, and Westfield has wells. So there's more than 1 billion gallons that are going out of that aquifer annually by people. The average is like 50 gallons per person, something like that. So here's how the water in this section of Barnes Aquifer is moving. To the north, heading toward the Oxbow, underground. So all those sandy deposits that we have in this section of town really make for, among other things, great cemeteries, right? Because what are you looking for, right? This is going to inform, as you drive through the landscape, now you're going to look at it differently. Because when you see a cemetery, you're going to think, I get it. Easy digging, no rocks, and no high groundwater table, because you do not want those bodies popping back up. And that is what happens when the Glacial Lake Hitchcock clays are close to the surface. Happened in Northampton with the first Catholic cemetery. They had to keep there's accounts of them holding the coffins down because the water was coming up. They did. The cemetery is no longer on King Street. It's now a playground. It's the Agnes Fox. Thank you. Playground, and now the St. Mary Cemetery is up off of Bridge Road in Northampton. So here's another thing that happens with these big sandy flat areas. This is Easthampton, looking at it in 1910. It's the Library of Congress image, looking down from Mount Tom. And if this is sort of what that area looks like today. Because just like with cemeteries for development, so here's the Natural Pond, these parts of Easthampton and other areas where there's these big openings, it's easy digging, few to no rocks, no high groundwater table, mostly flat and gently rolling, and then easy road layout. So we see this in lots of Easthampton, which has developed really since World War II. There's been a tremendous amount of housing here. Now, when the Pascommuck Conservation Trust began, that's in the 80s, its focus has always been the Manhan River. But in the last 40 plus years, we've learned a lot more about this watershed, and we have many more tools. So not only do we have talented people like this young guy, Tom Lautzenheiser, in this image, but thanks to research all over, we know much more about ecological systems, individual species, many of which are common, but we also know a lot more about many of the species which are declining or are actually rare, not only in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but more broadly in the nation. And so these are important tools for us to understand, okay, where do we buy land? Where do we protect land? The other really important tool that we have now is GIS, all right? It's this mapping tool that enables us to look at the landscape in such a different way. So here again is the outline of the Manhan watershed. All the permanently protected land is in green. So it helps you think about connecting things, or where should the next purchase be? Our dollars are limited, our energy and time is limited, right? So we want to get the best bang. But with these GIS layers that have a map, okay, now we can look at that same map, but we can look at it for, well, where are streams and rivers and wetlands of statewide significance? This work has been done. We can add to that, okay, what are the forests of statewide significance? We can add to that, what are the vernal pool areas of statewide significance? And so we can begin, and then here's rare species. So we can begin to layer these pieces so that we can look at these kind of ecological functions, but also integrate, as in this room, like, okay, where are areas of historic significance? Where are important trails? These other kind of cultural components, where is another data layer that I didn't include? Where is prime farmland, right? So these are all the kinds of questions that we can put together to make our purchases a little bit sharper than in the old days when it was like, well, that looks good. Connectivity is another really important question that we're only beginning to explore in terms of how is wildlife moving across the landscape. So here's a data layer thinking about connectivity in the Manhan watershed. And we can look at it, this is all of Western Mass, where we can think about how our animals have the capacity to move all the way from the Quabbin region to the Berkshires and back and forth. We can also look at it just more closely, just at Easthampton, but I think one of the things that's so important, and it really was touched upon by the comments tonight during the business meeting, was this kind of partnership, that we're not just thinking like what's in Easthampton. These maps are so important where we know what's just over the town boundary. So again, we can look at, okay, here's the protected land in Easthampton, which I know is now out of date based on tonight's meeting. We're missing at least 10 acres. But we can also, the other thing, a new series of data layers that are available for the last couple of years by the state is looking at local biodiversity. And so not at the statewide significance, but like what's important at a closer focus. So I'm going to just quickly add everything together. This is vernal pools, certified vernal pools as well as potential. But this is all the bells and whistles, everything for Easthampton, all layered on. And I think the piece that comes out to me in this, which I will say my screen looks way different than that. It's not quite as green. But what it does highlight is just how important the Manhan River is in that corridor. If you look, it really is the jewel that's running through your town. And then, of course, there's the Mount Town Range, but that's like, from a habitat perspective, wildly different. Last couple things to think about before I just focus on one conservation area, which is thinking now, the other part of our conversation, which was not a part of a conversation at all in the 1980s when the Pascommuck Conservation Trust formed, is climate change, right? And so if you look at this map, all the dark blue streams, all those tributaries are cold water fisheries. Among the most vulnerable resources for during climate change are the headwater streams and water temperature. And so here's the projection, which this map is not great, but I have the link if you want to look at it more. But this is the 2050 projection, which basically most of the Manhan shifts from a warm, kind of coolish stream to a warm water stream. And many of the cold water streams also make that jump. So the work that you're doing, the work that you're supporting is really important. And we see that repeatedly, all right? We have opportunities, but how do you make choices? But last year, the city of Northampton put out its decarbonization plan, its climate plan, and item number 4 is just consistent with what you're doing. It's protecting more land. And then Carrie Blood, who's here from the Kestrel Land Trust, Kestrel Land Trust is working not only here, but also in Southampton and West Hampton and Huntington. This is sort of this bigger vision that we really, especially now as our dollars and our overall energy is limited, we really need to work collaboratively. So, and the city of Northampton, kudos, has its new updated open space and recreation plan, which is another tool. Okay, grand finale. I want to take you to one of the conservation areas that I had not been to before. It's the Pomeroy Meadow Conservation Area. Within the holdings that you have, it's a kind of a medium size. It's about 17 acres. But one of the things that among the things I really love about it is that, so this portion of the Manhan is the boundary between Southampton and Easthampton. So on one side, on the, what will we say, kind of the northwest side, that's conserved land in Southampton, and then all of the green is conserved land here by you guys. And I went there the first time, which was actually thanks, I would say, to Marty in this opportunity, where I said to Fred, we gotta like start looking at this, because even though we don't live that far away, we have not had that much, we haven't taken advantage of what you have here. So, and the other thing, this is the other thing that's really cool, is that not only is this kind of connected now, historically it was connected. This is the remnants of an old bridge that extend from Easthampton to Southampton. You'd like that bridge back? Well, we'll get the invasive species money first, because there's a little bit of invasives there to block your way. Okay, here's among the many cool things about the Pomeroy Meadow Conservation Area. So this is what's called a LiDAR map of the area. But what I want you to see here is like, look at a big portion of it. This whole section here is all pretty flat. And then you have these deep fissures going. So, and then there's the Manhan, and you can see really over time how that river has moved back and forth across that landscape, right? You see the old meanders, but then there are these sharp gully features. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these flat areas are just swell to build on, and you can see here are the structures, all the houses in that neighborhood. But lucky them, they're close to that. And so here's the outline of the conservation area where you can park off of Ranch Avenue. And look at these gullies. Now, one of the things that's really neat is that you have these sandy, overtopping glacial Lake Hitchcock clays. So the water comes down, percolates through that sand, hits that clay layer, and emerges as springs. So at the base of all those gullies are springs and small streams. And needless to say, in anticipation of this presentation, I've been going there with some frequency. And they just don't freeze over. There's almost always the opportunity to see open water there. And so these are some of those sort of headwater streams that we're talking about, thinking about vulnerability and climate change. The other thing that's really neat about this piece of property is it's long, right? It's very extensive, and it's a beautiful piece. There's remnants of some old farm equipment. There's a diversity of habitat types, which is nicely written up on the Trust's website. But some of the things that you can't get from GIS, right? Thank you very much. I hope none of us are just sort of sitting at our computers looking at screens, because part of it is just beyond the joy of going out there, the discovering of things. So like that tree that I have my hand, that may be, it's one of the largest ironwoods in Massachusetts. And there's a little patch of them. And for those of you who have been to that conservation area, you know there's a lot of big, impressive trees on that site. So here is the surprise, and we'll see if it works. So I got permission from Marty to put out a couple wildlife cameras. And here we'll see if it goes. Whoops, that didn't go. Okay, well, this is the surprise. All right, let's try that one more time. Can't even find the cursor. Nope. Okay, that's all right. I'm going to end. Ta-da. But I have both of these, and I have not only one, but I have two. And I can also somehow get them on the Trust website, but some really nice things. So thank you all so much. Go Pascommuck Conservation Trust. Thank you all, and spring is coming.